What's the biggest red flag you've ever ignored? My ex-fiancé started to act suspicious and hid his mobile phone, especially when it vibrated to indicate a message or notification. He could have been planning an awesome surprise and wanted to hide it from me. But the final straw when I asked to see it, and he shoved me out of the way to leave, not caring if it ended the relationship. Turned out he was sleeping with my best friend at the time, who he used to call for ideas on gifts to buy me, and she decided that he was too good for me. They didn't last longer than a month. I still miss my best friend. TLDR, fiancé's phone, turns out he was sleeping with best friend.
That's a tough situation. It's always hard when someone you trust betrays you, especially when it involves a close friend. It's wild that he was asking for gift ideas from her while hiding the truth. Losing both a fiancé and a best friend is rough. It makes you question who you can really rely on. It's a lesson learned, I guess, but it still stings.
She had me drop her off a few houses away whenever we got back from dates. She said she didn't want to wake her parents up. It was usually before 10 when I dropped her off. Edit, I did go inside her house and meet her parents once, but it was a pretty bizarre encounter. They were both very quiet, and they didn't ask me a single question about myself. Didn't ask where I was taking their daughter, didn't ask what I did for a living, nothing. But yeah, I'm positive she lived at home with her parents. She constantly told me I was perfect, and then literally days later, faded and I never heard from her again. I still have no idea what the hell happened.
That's a strange situation for sure. It's odd when someone seems really into you but then just vanishes. The whole dropping her off a few houses down thing is a little off too. Makes you wonder what was going on at home. Meeting the parents just adds to the weirdness. It's like she had this idea of you but couldn't really commit. Sometimes people just aren't ready for something real. In the end, you don't really get closure.
My ex-wife was giddy about a new trainer at the gym. I asked jokingly if she wanted to fuck him. I didn't get a response. Long story short, divorced 2 months later loss. Edit, outcome, she married him and popped out a kid. It took me months of recovery and support by family and friends. I'm now happily married, smiley face. Lesson, never let someone sink your ship. Also, if your so seems giddy or start spending more time with someone, pay attention.
That's a rough situation to go through. It's weird how quick things can change when trust shifts. Sounds like you took the time to heal and learn from it, which is important. Glad to hear you found happiness again. It's a good reminder to keep an eye on those changes in relationships. Sometimes people just drift away when other interests come up.
The first time I met my wife's mother, she spent half an hour talking about medical problems that most people would find disgusting. I didn't realize until after I married my wife that she was trying to scare me off. She has spent the past 15 years trying to get in between my wife and I, trying to start arguments and fights, and generally trying to destroy my marriage. The worst part is, I knew she had done that with all her other daughters' marriages. She has 7 daughters and 2 sons. That's the red flag. My wife and I have decided to love her from a distance, but she still gives us crap and guilts my wife because she doesn't spend enough time with her. I still worry if they ever spend time alone, though.
That sounds like a tough situation. Meeting the mother-in-law can be awkward, especially when there's hidden tension. It's unfortunate when family dynamics get in the way of relationships. It's good that you and your wife have found a way to handle it together. Loving from a distance is a mature approach, but it does add pressure, especially if there's guilt involved. It's always a bit nerve-wracking when family drama is in the mix.
Red flag equals friends who tell you juicy secrets about other people, including people in your friend circle, followed by don't tell anyone I told you though. Advice equals don't ever trust this person with anything you don't want getting around. If they're betraying others behind their backs, then 9 times out of 10, they're doing the same to you once you turn yours.
I had a friend who loved sharing secrets about our circle. At first, it seemed harmless, just gossip. But over time, I realized they were spilling my stuff too. I learned to keep my life to myself when they were around. It wasn't worth the risk. Honestly, if someone talks behind others' backs, they'll probably do the same to you. Better to keep a distance. Trust is hard to come by.
I've posted this before about my ex. He told me that if I ever got cancer and the chemotherapy made me lose my hair, he would dump me because bald girls are disgusting. This was after we'd been together for almost a year. He would also tell me what I could and couldn't wear, even if I wasn't planning to see him that day. He'd yell at me if I wore something on the unapproved list. It's sad that these things, along with quite a few other obvious red flags, didn't make me realize what a douche he was until after the relationship ended.
It's tough when someone you think you know turns out to be so controlling. That kind of behavior can really mess with your self-esteem. Sometimes it's hard to see the red flags while you're in it. It's a lesson learned, but it's good that you're out of that situation now. Finding someone who supports you is way more important than dealing with that kind of negativity.
He went into my computer and read my journal over the course of about 2 weeks. He then had a big drunken shit fit over the fact that I'd had sex with my ex-boyfriends. He knew I had ex-boyfriends. He wasn't religious, knew I wasn't a virgin when we met. It was very unclear why he was making himself out to be a victim when he was the one invading my privacy. I worked it out with him. Dumb. Should have gotten rid of him while I had the chance. To be more clear, I should have gotten rid of him at that point rather than waiting for the rest of the dumb drama to play out before we eventually broke up.
This guy went through your stuff and got upset about your past. Seems messy, especially since he had to know you weren't a virgin. The whole thing about privacy is wild. It's strange how some people play victim when they're the ones crossing boundaries. I mean, it sounds like you realize you should have ditched him earlier. Sometimes you just know it's better to move on before it gets worse.
I'm an arborist. I was kind of worried about a big red oak in a client's backyard, and I said we should do a root excavation and see if it had lost its original roots as I suspected. It would have cost $300. He wanted to wait a few months, and I was like, fine, whatever. A month later, it fell on his house and totally detached the third floor and smashed half of it. It's a historic house, so the repairs were well over $100,000. So I didn't totally ignore it, but I should have really insisted. Now, when people want to blow off my warnings, I tell them about the guy who had the third floor move a few feet to the left while the rest of the house stayed put.
That sounds pretty intense. It's tough when clients don't take advice seriously. I've been there, trying to warn a friend about a leaky roof. They brushed it off, and a heavy rain ended up causing a ton of damage. Sometimes you just can't force people to see the risks. Now every time I bring it up, it's just a reminder of how important it is to act on these things before it's too late.
I played WoW a lot. I gamed with a guy whose apartment was burning. Fire apart, blasting water on the neighbor's window. He could not see his screen to well with the smoke. He refused to leave during raid night and kept tanking Axe. Kelmar, if you were around, man, you were one crazy dude. I took a raiding break.
That's wild. I can't believe your friend stayed in the middle of a fire to keep gaming. Most people would bail in a situation like that. Guess he really wanted to finish that raid. It must have been something seeing the fire department outside while he kept tanking. Shows how dedicated some players can be. Taking that break sounds like a good idea after witnessing that kind of chaos.
So 2 nights ago, my buddy tells me that he hooked up with this girl that he has been talking to for 2 weeks. At first, I was super excited for him, as he had a nasty breakup a few months ago. Then I asked the obligatory, "So you made sure you wrapped it up, right?" He just met her a few weeks ago. He responds with, "I didn't, but it's okay because I asked her if she was clean, and she said she gets checked all the time." I say in silence for a second, and then asked, Did she ask you if you were clean? His eyes got wide and then he got quiet. No, she didn't. I think it kind of sunk in as he didn't say much for the rest of the night. He's awaiting a doctor visit soon, so I'm waiting to see how this one shakes out. TLDR, wrap it up, guys.
It's wild how people can overlook the basics sometimes. Your buddy was probably just caught up in the moment. The fact that he didn't think to ask shows he might not be fully ready yet. Hopefully, he learns from this experience. It's tough, but health should always come first. At least he's going to get checked now. Just another reminder to be safe out there.
Back then, I was seeing a therapist for a few reasons, mostly anxiety and self-esteem issues. My girlfriend at the time told me that seeing a therapist was for crazy people and that I didn't need to because I had her. She was a horrible person. I keep asking myself why I dated her, and I hate myself for it.
It's tough when someone you care about doesn't support you. That kind of negativity can really mess with your head. It sounds like you were in a rough situation. It's good that you sought help despite the pressure. A relationship should lift you up, not bring you down. It's all a part of learning about yourself and what you really want. You deserve better than that.
While we're talking about the meaning of life, my former best friend said, the meaning of life was to do anything you can make only yourself happy. Shouldn't have been surprised when I found out he was a narcissistic sociopath. He also broke someone's finger for watching a video on their phone when he wanted to play the piano. That flag could have covered the continent, and I missed it.
It's interesting how people can have such different views on life. Your friend really took that to another level, though. The way he acted shows a pretty big disconnect from reality. It's strange how you can overlook red flags like that until something drastic happens. I guess it's a reminder to pay attention to the signs people show, even if they're subtle.
I was sitting by a fire with a buddy, because that's what we do in our free time. His girlfriend was there, so third wheel and stuff. He convinced me to call my girlfriend at the time, who only lived a mile or two away, and see if she'd come over. I called her. She said she couldn't because she never would tell her dad or grandparents, whom she lived with, about us. Buddy called her. She was suddenly more receptive of the idea. Turns out she was trying to get to him. Good thing he's a good friend.
That's an interesting situation. You think you're just hanging out, but then things get complicated. It's wild how some people will keep secrets like that, even with someone they supposedly care about. It's cool your buddy had your back, though. Friendships can get messy when relationships are involved. Just goes to show that sometimes, you never really know what's going on behind the scenes.
The red flag. One morning I got a text from my GF at the time saying, "I can't see you today, baby." We didn't have plans. I knew that was a text for someone else, but she was just so sweet and cute I ignored it, and thought it was just a mistake because she said she was dreaming about going out with me, but later found out she couldn't. She was cheating on me. I know it's a stupid reason on her part as an excuse, but I was 16 and in love.
Noticing the inconsistency in that message must have stung. It's tough when you care about someone and they don't reciprocate the same honesty. At 16, those feelings can feel all-consuming, and it's easy to brush off red flags. Looking back, it's a common experience for many of us, trying to convince ourselves it's just a misunderstanding. Lessons learned, I guess. Heartbreaks shape us, even if they're rough.
I dated a guy who had a crazy number of pictures of his ex-girlfriend on Facebook, including pictures of them kissing. I thought it was weird to still have those up, but I ignored them. Turns out he's still in love with her and can't develop feelings for anyone else, and dumped me after I told him that I loved him.
That's definitely a tough situation. It's hard when someone can't let go of their past, and it's clear they haven't moved on. Pretty rough to be in a relationship where your feelings aren't being reciprocated. It can mess with your head, especially when you're being vulnerable and opening up. Just goes to show that sometimes, it's better to find someone who's emotionally available.
A guy I dated for a while told me, sometimes I could be a little clingy. I brushed it off because I previously dated a guy who I thought was as clingy can get. And I thought it was one of those things where if you think you're clingy or you admit to it, you're probably not as clingy as you think. No, I was way wrong.
I had a similar experience. There was this girl I went out with, and she mentioned how she could get a bit needy. I thought it was just a casual comment, like maybe she meant it lightly. Turns out, she was serious. It became overwhelming pretty fast. It's funny how you think you know what to expect, but sometimes you just don't. Life lessons in relationships, I guess.
On our first date, she asked for a water and the waiter forgot. Big fucking deal, right? A few minutes into the appetizer, the waiter asks if there is anything else he can get us, to which she responds, "I'm pretty sure I asked for a water," while looking directly at him with a condescending look on her face. That relationship lasted longer than I'd like to admit.
It's funny how little things can set the tone, right? That moment is pretty relatable. It feels like those first dates are just full of surprises. Sometimes, it's not even about the water but how people react. The long-lasting part is interesting too. You realize things you tolerate at first aren't always easy down the line. Just shows how expectations can change over time.
Was on holiday in Thailand, 2004, lying on the beach, soaking up the sun, and generally enjoying the holiday. Got a strange text from my dad in the UK that read, "Get away from the water, there's a tsunami coming." TBH, I didn't know what a tsunami was really, so I ignored it. Fortunately, we were on the island of Koh Samui, which was completely unaffected by the terrible events elsewhere in the region.
That's a wild story. Must have been a weird moment just chilling on the beach. Getting a text like that would freak most people out. Good thing you were in a safe spot. It's crazy how something you don't fully understand can suddenly change your whole vibe. Sounds like a holiday that could have taken a bad turn but ended up being just another day on the island.
Had severe hip pain age 17 to 22. Chalked it up to scoliosis and overall crookedness. Then had a routine exam, and turns out a bone tumor ate my hip joint, and it had broken twice. I thought, wow, I must be real tough to be walking around with a broken hip for the past 5 years. Then I thought, no, I must be missing some brain cells.
That's rough. It's wild to think you were living with that pain for so long without knowing. Most people would be a bit more concerned about something like that, but I guess you just got used to it. It's kind of funny in a way, realizing you thought you were tough when it was really just ignoring a serious issue. Glad you found out what was going on.
Went to the fair and felt sick afterwards. Thought it was a stomach virus. Felt better the next day, but progressively got worse as the week wore on. Finally, after 3 or 4 days, I went to the hospital and found out I had pancreatitis. Doctor at our local hospital didn't know how to treat and almost died before being transferred. Fun times.
That's rough. It's hard when you think it's just a small issue but it turns out to be serious. The hospital experience must have been really scary, especially not knowing what was happening. It's good you got transferred in time, though. Sometimes those places really don't know how to handle everything. Glad you pulled through.
My grandfather, in good health, collapsed one day on the stairs, his legs totally non-functional. He crawled into bed and took a nap, was fine afterwards. Didn't say anything to my grandmother until a few days later. She made him drive to the hospital to have it checked out. He never left the hospital again.
That's a tough story. It's strange how things can change in a moment. Your grandfather seemed to handle it pretty nonchalantly at first, but eventually it caught up to him. It's wild that he didn't mention it for days. I guess sometimes, people downplay their health until it's more serious. Makes you think about how fragile life can be.
Black poop story. A roommate and I had an Oreo eating contest. A few hours later, he came out of his room, white as a ghost, claiming he had stomach cancer. Asked why does he think that? He says it's because his poop was black, and according to Google, black poop is stomach cancer. We went to the ER, and he's in full panic mode. We're talking to the doctor, and he keeps repeating it's stomach cancer. I know it, so I lean into the doctor and asked, would eating Oreos do this? And he says it can. You would have to eat like half a package in a sitting, though. Then he smiled. He ate half a package, didn't he?
That sounds like a wild night. It's funny how our minds can jump to the worst conclusions, especially with the internet as our guide. The poor guy must have been freaking out, but it's nice the doctor handled it well. Just goes to show that sometimes, the simplest explanation is just eating too many snacks. Oreo contests can be risky business, I guess.
Remind me of a call I got. I was working on homework when my phone rang from someone really close to me. I answered, and there were just faint sounds on the other end of the line. Being distracted, I said something like, "Hey, you there?" "Oh, you," but dialed me, waited a couple seconds, and hung up. A couple hours later, I find out that the person who called me had attempted suicide. They had phoned me to hear my voice for the last time. Thank fuck they survived. Made me reevaluate how attentive I was to others. I make sure to always call anyone back who but dials me now.
This story is a reminder of how small moments can carry weight. I've had similar experiences where I brushed off calls, thinking they were just mistakes. It's crazy how a simple connection can mean a lot more than we realize. Now I always check in on friends more often. You never know what someone might be going through, and sometimes just hearing a voice can make a difference.
Yeah, it took me a very long time, but I finally realized that every girl I've had a crush on since I was 14, and every girl I've ever been with, except one, has been crazy to some degree or another. The only one who wasn't crazy is the only one I've ever dumped. Obviously, I like crazy, even though I am in denial about it. The only logical conclusion I can draw from this is that I am crazy.
Sounds like you've been on quite the journey. It's funny how we often attract what we might not even realize we like. Maybe it's the thrill of it all. Denying it is common, but acknowledging it can be a step toward understanding yourself better. Sometimes, you just gotta embrace the chaos in your life. It's all part of learning what you want and who you are.
My ex was always talking about how cool and nice this guy was in a competing fraternity. Lo and behold, they are now married. 2 weeks after we broke up, all of her friends posted on her Facebook that it was about time they got together. 5 years down the shitter. LOL edit. My top comment is about somebody that I used to know. Fantastic.
Sounds like a classic case of moving on too quickly. It's wild how some people just jump into new relationships right after a breakup. Those posts from her friends must have been a bit much. Guess it's a reminder that not everyone sees things the same way. But hey, at least you're not in that situation anymore. Just let it roll off.
My GF's ex was like that. Poor woman dealt with stuff like that all the time. Like he would constantly want to be on the phone with her after she got off work, and she would fall asleep because she was tired, and he would freak out saying she didn't love him and blah blah. To me, using the, well, if you love me, then you do, this, for me, seems like emotional extortion. Maybe not the right word, ick. I grew up in a house where my parents used guilt all the time to get what they wanted. I don't feel that's a good thing to do in a relationship.
That sounds tough. It's a sad pattern when someone tries to manipulate feelings like that. I've seen friends deal with similar situations where their partners put them on the spot. It can really drain you, especially if you're not emotionally equipped to handle it. Growing up in that kind of environment can shape how you view relationships. It's important to communicate openly and not use guilt to get what you want.
I lost my job last month. Just as my girlfriend gets more shifts at work, her grades are better, she has more money, she knows it makes me feel uncomfortable and almost like an accessory. But I'd never stop her from enhancing her life just because I'm insecure within myself. I don't understand people like that. Sad face.
It's tough when life seems to shift like that. I had a friend who faced something similar. He lost his job while his partner was climbing the ranks at her work. He felt like he was just tagging along, but he always supported her. They talked it out, and it ended up bringing them closer. It's not easy, but being honest can really help both partners grow together.
But he called you an ambulance after, right? Some of my kids asked me for a cigarette outside a pub in a reasonably nice area. They were maybe about 13, and I burst out laughing and said no. They threatened to chib me, but as there was a barrier on the pavement guarded by a bouncer, they couldn't do anything until I stepped outside onto the pavement proper. They waited for about 2 hours until I presume they had to go back to their Kelvin-side mansions for bedtime.
Sounds like you had an interesting encounter. Kids these days can be pretty bold, thinking they can threaten adults. It's funny how they wait around for so long, probably thinking they'd get a chance. Just goes to show that sometimes, the bravado doesn't match the reality of the situation. Glad you kept your cool though. Definitely not something you expect to deal with outside a pub.
You know, when I first read that now infamous quote, I was not as put off by it as I am now. When I first read it, I saw it more like, people have bad days, and if you're going to leave at the first sign of a bad day, then you don't deserve me on my good days. Which I still maintain is true. I didn't realize there was a cadre of women who translated it more as, I could be as crazy as I want, and you have to put up with it.
It's interesting how perspectives shift over time. That quote felt supportive at first, like a reminder that everyone has tough moments. But then you see how some people twist it into an excuse for problematic behavior. It shows how meaning can change based on our experiences and the company we keep. In the end, it's about balance and understanding what boundaries really mean in relationships.
An old roommate called from work and asked me to get something from his closet to give to a friend was coming by. I, being a shorty, attempted the old jump and grab but failed. One of those old-fashioned hard-shelled suitcases fell onto my head and showered me in contents similar to your mama's accessories, but also baby wipes, adult diaper, a huge bonnet, and what I think was a onesie. I tried to put everything back, but had no clue how it was packed. He knew I found it. I knew he knew I found it. We never talked about it, but I was definitely creeped out by the girl's 3X size that he'd bring home.
That's a strange scenario. It's funny how awkward moments can stick with you. You go looking for a simple item, and then you're met with baby wipes and a onesie. It's like a little peek into someone else's life. Not sure what was going on there, but I guess sometimes you just let those things slide. The unspoken tension definitely adds to the weirdness.
I remember that day like it happened yesterday. It's weird because I was never a fan of NASCAR like my dad was. Decided to really watch it. Give it another chance, 5 minutes and boom. The accident happened. I remember watching my dad a few hours later as he watched the replays. He was pretty upset. Someone lost their daddy today. Ebbs, 37. I think the next time I really paid attention to NASCAR again was 2 years ago when I was high as shit on pain medication.
I used to think NASCAR was boring, just like you. Then one day, I sat down with my dad, and we watched a race together. Midway through, there was this huge crash. My dad got really quiet, just staring at the screen, replays and all. It hit me how much it affected him. I didn't care for racing much after that until I found myself zoning into it a couple of years later for other reasons.
You have to be slightly sneaky about it. What are you looking for in an employee? Why are you hiring for this position? Are you replacing a vacancy created by promotion, firing, quit, or are they geo-wing? What is the growth potential like? You'll get a lot of lies on this one. How long do most people stay in this role? Where do they go after?
So, I once had a friend who interviewed for a job. He asked the manager, "What are you looking for in an employee?" And, "Why is this position open?" The manager seemed caught off guard. My friend also inquired about growth potential and how long people typically last in the role. Turns out, the place had a pretty high turnover. My friend decided to pass on that opportunity. Good instinct.
Red flag I had at work was during the interview, I asked the guy what he liked most about his job. He basically just went, awkward chuckle, man, it's a good one. Chair squeak. Pen click. I like the hours. I shouldn't have taken the job, but I needed the job. I quit 10 months later. Worst job ever.
That interview sounds pretty uncomfortable. You could tell right off that he wasn't really into the job. It's tough when you need to take a position, even if it's a bad fit. I've been there before too. Sometimes you just have to stick it out until you find something better. Quitting after 10 months shows you knew it wasn't right for you. Glad you moved on.
I ask about it at every interview. What's the turnover rate look like? You can tell by how they answer what kind of company they are. My current job said for this role, higher than the rest of the company. Mostly due to promotion to more permanent roles, but sometimes due to a poor fit. I've been here a year, and I'm still loving it.
It's interesting how turnover can say a lot about a company. I once had a friend who asked similar questions at interviews. He ended up finding a place where people actually stayed long-term. It turned out to be a good fit for him too. Makes you realize how important it is to pay attention to those details. A year in a role and enjoying it is a solid sign.
I had a wisdom tooth removed, and the dentist prescribed 600 milliliters 3 times a day for a week. I bought a big bottle of Motrin, so after a week, I had all these pills left over. Kept taking them for aches and pains, headaches, etc. for a few more weeks. Ibuprofen is bad news for your stomach if you take too much. One doctor I spoke with told me that if ibuprofen were a new drug today, that there is no way that it would be approved by the FDA as an off-the-shelf drug. It's just too dangerous if overused.
It sounds like you went through a lot after your tooth removal. I know a few people who have taken painkillers long after they needed them. It's easy to rely on them for headaches or other aches. I guess it's important to be cautious with these meds. Better to check in with a doctor when unsure about the dosage or duration. Your stomach will thank you later.
My father has a long track record with crazy women. I've been a witness to a lot of shit, and I can verify that in rare occasions, it really is everybody else. I don't know why he's only attracted to lunatics. I only thank the stars that he didn't pass his curse on. Well, at least not that curse. Hair loss, on the other hand, one of them attacked him with a sword. A fucking sword. I was very nearly never born because of a sword. Very few people in the last century can make that claim.
That's a wild story. I mean, getting attacked with a sword really puts things in perspective. It's interesting to see how some people seem to attract chaos. Sounds like your dad has had his share of drama. At least you dodged that particular curse. Hair loss seems like a minor issue compared to a sword fight. Guess you can appreciate the calm a bit more after witnessing all that.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.